again, so I'm just turning the recording on. All yours.
Great. Okay. Right. What I'll do is, if anybody's got a question during the course of this, if you stick your hand up, and then if Jack, if you sort of unmute, because I've pretty much closed everything now. I can see that I'm talking, but if anybody does want to ask a really burning question during the sort of the course of the presentations, that's absolutely fine. But on the assumption that we're all ready to go, I'll get moving, because it'd be nice actually to try and complete within about half an hour and then leave 15-20 minutes for questions at the end. Okay, case study as a way to explore organizations. I mean, the first thing to always say is that what do we mean by organizations, and why should we study them? I come from, as I would happily admit, an engineering tradition. So the view of engineers is that things comply with the known laws of physics, until of course they don't, and then of course you have to sort of do a lot of head scratching. But the point I would make is that that world is subject to sort of the laws that we understand and we can calculate to very sort of finite limits. And of course it allows us to sort of put up skyscrapers, to fly planes, and to do all the things that we sort of we take for granted in the modern world. But of course, the whole point about our modern world is to sort of make our lives better, and organizations are part of that. And what I'm saying is that sort of to make our organizations function more effectively, that there's a long tradition of this, of trying to sort of treat them as if they were machine-like entities, but so-called scientific management. But organizations are nothing if not made up of people. If you take the people out of the organizations, you have a system, and you can have a very effective technical system, but that's all it is. And of course, as we know, that the technical systems work until there's a glitch, and then it may be a software problem, but it's readily resolved. And where I come into this, and this is, I'll give you a very quick overview of my own PhD, was when I was studying way back in the sort of the early 90s, the introduction of a new method of management. It's quality management, which you've probably all heard about. And what I was interested in is, what impact did this have on people, and what disruption did it cause to sort of the normal working? So my way of doing it, and this is where I became very attracted to doing organization, also using case studies as a way to understand organizations, is to sort of go in and see how the sort of the practices were impacted, disrupted, benefited, whatever, in terms of the introduction of this thing called quality management. And what I would stress before we sort of get going is that in every instance there was a different sort of set of objectives, perhaps, albeit that it was all broadly the same sort of thing, to produce organization improvement. But most particularly what it did do, and of course it alerted me to something which I was kind of aware of, but it became more and more apparent, is that every organization is different because of the sort of the people involved. And more especially, the one health one I would always give is that sort of just because we study an organization, it doesn't mean to say that sort of the practices are consistent. They vary, because of course that's the sort of nature of people. And of course the positives would say that virtue makes this sort of research not impossible to do, but of course it means you can't produce the sort of the neat sort of scientific theories, and that's also very true. But you know, there are people who use organizations to sort of to examine preconceived notions, or so-called hypothetical deductive research. I'm much more inclined to use it as a method to explore what goes on and why, and then to draw the theory, or to sort of to theory build as a consequence. So, okay, so yeah, by and large, what I've done is given you an overview of what we're going to sort of to look at in the next half hour or so, when we sort of look at the slides. Why do we use case studies in organizational research? How do we sort of apply them? How do we apply them appropriately? And what I hope, of course, this does, it sort of allows people to understand the way in which you may be able to sort of to use this particular approach in terms of assisting your own study. And so without further ado, here's a sort of fairly robust definition, in my opinion. A research approach that's used to generate in-depth, multifaceted understanding of a complex issue. In fact, I could have said complex issues in its real-life context, and of course the words there, the naturalistic setting is the organization. So what you're not trying to do is to sort of as much as possible, is to sort of to make it so it's a sort of simulation, because sometimes you do that. You want to see things as they occur, and what people do, how they do it. And more particularly, and this is something which I'm really sort of keen on, is to sort of get those people who are involved to offer, or to proffer, if you wish, their own accounts of what they do and how they do it. In fact, I come back to one of the pieces of advice that my supervisor sort of gave me. He said, you know, what do they think they're up to? What do they think they're doing? And of course, that's interesting, because of course, the assumption was, certainly in my case, is that they're all doing something consistent. But the reality is that people have their own particular interpretations of what they think they want to achieve. And of course, that in organizations, a lot of other things that go on, which provide, if you like, the sort of the milieu of the culture, if you wish to use that word, that applies in a particular setting. And indeed, what I would alert you to also is that sort of organizational culture is often seen as a sort of a very close bedfellow of organizational practice. And the idea is that if you can somehow crack the sort of the culture, you crack the sort of the organization. But hey, as I always like to sort of to stress, managers have a very sort of you know, seductive view that if they can somehow get control of what goes on, they can sort of you know, turn the sort of the dials up, if you like, and produce maximum organizational efficiency in practice all the time, because of course that's in their interest. And it doesn't always work like that. And of course, there's a very strong sort of tradition in looking at organizational practice through the lens of sociology, which suggests that the more that managers think they're in control, the more they're out of control, because it's actually organizations work on the basis of collaboration and cooperation. But okay, you know, that's all to be explored. So it is a sort of, it's an established approach, design, and it's used in sort of a number of disciplines, but of course most particularly in what's called the social sciences. And for anybody that kind of might think, well, this doesn't apply to me, what social sciences means is that where you're interested in sort of the interaction of people, technology, systems, and whatever else goes on, then it's a method of, as I say, getting in and better and more deeply understanding all the things that occur. And that the explanations, as I've mentioned already, that are offered by the sort of those people who are involved in day-to-day practice. And by so doing, more importantly, what I would point out is that sort of how can you really improve unless you properly understand? So that's the sort of the real objective, in my opinion. It's to sort of to get, you know, underneath the surface, because what we see on the surface of organizations, or their external view, and in many cases that's very deliberately presented to give the sort of the image of all that is well. It's a bit like a car. You know, a car might look perfect on the outside, but of course if there's something wrong with the engine, it's never going to fulfill its function. So you have to, you know, lift up the sort of the bonnet or the hood or whatever you care to call it, and then sort of work out where the problem is. And then once you've done that, once you've diagnosed it, then you're in a better position to sort of to make a realistic assessment of what needs to be done. Okay. There's a number of definitions of case study research. Any of you that sort of done any sort of reading around the sort of the area of, in particular, management and organizational research will probably have come across Yin. Robert Yin tends to be regarded as the sort of the main seminal voice in all of this, and has written a number of texts. Staker, who I also sort of refer to, Mars and Human, and there's a couple of others who've pop up. But you know, this is just a diagram that I got, which neatly summarized. But again, I like the first one. A case study is both the process of learning about the case and the product of our learning. And what I like about that is that indeed, what I would also sort of hopefully suggest to you is that sort of the process of carrying out research between your supervisors, but also more particularly sort of the participants that you talk to. It's a process of co-learning. The big value I think I got out of what I did when I sort of studied a number of organizations was the ability of the people I was working with to sound ideas off me, as it were, or to bounce ideas and to discuss them. So as I say, we all became collaborative learners, and as a consequence, they benefited quite clearly. I benefited in terms of being able to garner the data I needed for the completion of my doctorate. But so it can be, if it's seen in those sort of terms, extremely sort of powerful and valuable. But coming to yin, as I say, the all-encompassing feature of a case study is this intense focus of a single phenomenon within its real life context. Actually, you could say it could be phenomena. There could be a number of things that you may be looking at. Although what I would sort of say is that sort of the more that you can bound the study. So if you say, I want to just study an organization, that doesn't really mean a lot. What makes a sort of a piece of work successful and effective when you're setting out in particular is to sort of to be as directional as possible about what particular bit of the organizational practice that you're interested in. And again, if somebody said to me, I want to do a sort of study of motivation in, I don't know, a technology company. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to know a bit more. What is it that you're going to look at, and what does the sort of the motivational aspect consist of? But at least it's starting to narrow down, because of course, even though again, we'll talk about this in due course, there may be a sort of a kind of hunch when you start off with, and indeed there may even be a sort of testing. And indeed, just to sort of to point out to you, my view when I started off was I was going to hypothesis test the effectiveness of quality management in organizations, until I found that it was really difficult, because of course the whole thing about carrying out sort of such an approach of hypothesis testing, there has to be sort of causality. And what I discovered once I started talking to these people is that a number of things were happening, some because of quality management, and there were lots of what might be seen as unintended consequences and benefits, I might also add. So it's very difficult to sort of to get that sort of that clear linkage. So what I was then able to do is to sort of to adapt the research. And I think this is what the value is. By being fleet of foot, as it were, or agile, I was able to sort of to reinterpret the sort of the purpose of the work, which was just to better understand, and then to sort of to really sort of focusing on what was going on and how could I make sense of it, and how could I develop useful sort of theories, or to use another word, explanations of the things that were occurring. So the important thing is, and again, coming back to sort of to yin, I'll use the sort of the cursor here, a contemporary phenomenon. So it's something that's happening. It's not to say you could do something retrospective, but of course the difficulty of retrospection is that people's memories change, and it's a bit like the police will always tell you that descriptions of sort of things that happen are notoriously sort of unreliable. So best if you're sort of in the sort of the action, or in the thick of it, because of course you can get people to sort of talk about what's going on and why at the time. And the other thing I also counter against is that some people often want to talk about speculative research, something that may happen. Well, you won't know what's going to happen or what's occurring until it's actually implemented. So that so as I say, being able to sort of to be in an organization. So of course that introduces the aspect, which I'll talk about also, of access. If you can't get access, then of course it's really difficult to do. Not impossible, but extremely sort of difficult. There's a whole set of ethical issues of sort of do you go undercover as a kind of almost like an investigative journalist, and I would suggest that most universities are very uncomfortable about that for very good ethical reasons. So what you've really got to be able to do is to sort of gain access if you're external to the organization. But better still, if you're in an organization and you want to sort of look at internal practices as they affect you and others around you, then as long as, of course, it's completely overt, or you're overt about what you're up to, and the fact that you're studying these people, because of course, as I say, that there are ethics, you can't just study people and not tell them. But doing it internally can be really good. But again, the second of those points, looking at the boundaries, and again, it's the sort of you're interested in some aspect of practice and how it's altering or transitioning as a consequence of the thing that you're particularly interested in. Okay, I'll leave that slide if I can do. So again, you may have come across this expression, thick descriptions. And so it's about sort of, as I've said in the sort of the title, depth rather than numbers. Now, it's not to say that you can't use a sort of numerical approach, and you can use questionnaires if you wish. But of course, the whole thing about questionnaires, as anybody who's ever tried to sort of create them, is there has to be sort of codification. And by that, I mean is that you have to have fairly clear definitions of what it is that you're asking. Because if you start asking lots of open-ended questions, you get lots of open-ended answers, and they're very difficult to sort of codify. And you kind of, in my view, this is where I ended up, you slip into sort of the long-winded descriptions, but of course they can be really fascinating. And the other thing, which I again would always stress to when I'm using this technique, is things manifest themselves or pop out, if you will, that you never even sort of contemplated. One of the things, again, I was found really sort of attractive about this is that had I stuck to sort of asking questions about the things I'd read in the sort of the text that I consulted before carrying out this research, I'd have been looking at those things that what the seminal authors at that time believed was important and necessary to sort of be implemented and whatever else. But when I started talking to people, they were telling me things which are not entirely different to sort of the established wisdom, but it provided a very different perception and interpretation of what they believed were the sort of the salient aspects of the things that they needed to do. So as I say, it provides you with a sort of really good armory, to better understand the sort of the all the sort of the particular aspects that come into play when people are doing whatever it is that you're interested in. Okay, so active engagement. So the point is that I think if anybody says, "Oh, I'm going to do a case study, I'm going to send lots of questionnaires to these organizations," that's not really case study research. Okay, for sure, you may have a number of organizations, but it doesn't fit into the scheme that I would believe applies to what we're talking about here today. And most particularly, what you're interested in is the sort of the accounts by the people who are involved, which I've said on a number of occasions, but it is absolutely essential, because if you really want to better understand, then talk to the people doing whatever it is that you're interested in. And that I do really exhort you to go and look at the sort of literature. There's a long tradition of doing this, often under the guise of what's known as organisational ethnography, but I won't get into that so much as, but again, really fascinating accounts of how organisations operate from the inside, as opposed to sort of the outside in, as it were. So, skill of the researcher to make sense. And I do really sort of stress is providing faithful interpretation, faithful accounts. One of the things I would point out to people, and I've done this on many occasions, and being part of the examination vivas for doctors, where the question comes up, well, how did you record the data, or how do you know that's what people actually said? And even though there might be difficulties, the best way of doing this is actually to record the conversations or the interviews, if you will, if at all possible, and there may be sort of impediments to that, and then to transcribe what's actually said. And it's a fairly long-winded and difficult process, but of course it really does help you to understand what people say. The point being that second-hand accounts of what you think people said, it means that sort of the odd word here or there, it may seem relatively important, but it can change the sort of the emphasis and the sort of the meaning that people sort of believe that they'd attached to what they were telling you. But importantly, of course, the real challenge in this, and there are many challenges to sort of using this approach, is to deciding what it is that you want to look at, because of course you can't repeat everything, otherwise it becomes, if you like, fly on the wall documentary. And that's not to say that that's not a really valuable way of getting better understanding. And even then, of course, that you could be in for many weeks, in some cases months, and if in my case it was a few years. You can't tell everything, or you can't report every encounter that you have, because of course it just becomes impossible. So you do have to sort of decide upon the things that you believe are most important or most germane to the sort of the particular study that you're carrying out. Now, I've added this in. I came across this, and of course it might sort of seem to be sort of something of a sort of a bit of a condemnation, but I don't believe it is. It's soft journalism, insofar as that you're reporting the stories of that people provide and the accounts in a way that might seem journalistic. And of course, as we know, journalism has some sort of questionable sort of status amongst some, but it's without the sensationalism. What you're trying to do, again, is to emphasize is accurate report what's going on and why. Okay, I did mention this author, Robert Stake. The real business of case study research is particularisation, not generalization. We take a particular case and we come to know it well. There is an emphasis on uniqueness. We emphasize placing an observer in the field to observe the workings of the case, one who records objectively what is happening, but simultaneously examines its meaning and redirects observation to refine, or substantiate those meanings. And that dare I say, is the sort of the real skill, is to take what's going on and to sort of then to provide it with reference to certainly the established wisdom, so the excellent literature, but better still to as I was able to do, is to challenge that established wisdom or established knowledge that's contained in the pre-existing literature, and then to provide different interpretations or explanations. And of course, by so doing, that's where the new knowledge is posited within the body of literature. And of course, for a PhD student, that is, if you're able to do that, then by and large, you've actually effectively achieved the objective, because that's what a PhD is supposed to be about. So, it's a very, very valuable way of getting in and extracting these new insights, as it were, and better still to be able to provide better understanding for those who come along subsequently in terms of research, but also, if at all possible, and certainly I did this in the textbook, is to provide accounts which will be used by those in practice. One of the things I would say is that I made a differentiation between what I called practitioner-orientated literature, which is meant to be very simplistic, and it's often it's a sales job, and they may be written by people who have vested interest, and what I regard as academic literature, which of course is much more about the theories and providing better wisdom and understanding. But the two should coexist, and indeed there should be a symbiosis. One should exist in relation to the other, and they should not be kept apart as much as, but they should be joined as much as possible. But sometimes there is that binary divide. And of course, the thing about doing case studies is it may seem a messy and imprecise. I'd like to use the word journey, and it can be a bit like that. You kind of know where you're going, but you're not quite sure of the route, and that's where the skill is. It does provide uncertainty, and what you then have to do is to work your way through the issues, and to work with and on the basis of what becomes available and what becomes interesting. So the most important thing, of course, is that, well, where is the case going to be located? How do you select it? More particularly, is it going to be one case study or a number of case studies? And I would also stress to you that I've seen people talk about doing 10 case studies. The reality is that, like everything, if you keep cutting thinner and thinner, you end up with superficiality. So a really good case study with the depth of examination is, in my opinion, better than somebody who claims they're going to do 20 or 30 case studies, because all you do is you go a day here and a day then. You become a bit like a tourist. You see it for a few hours and then you move on. So, but there is, and it's not to say that this may be a very good argument about using a number of case studies to try and compare and contrast different practices. But I would point out to be aware that if you try and make this, if you make life difficult by trying to do too much or be in too many different places, then becomes problematic. Now, of course, I'm just reflecting back on my situation where I did actually study 12 organizations, but that was over a fair period of time, probably about 2.5 years. So yeah, I would normally go and visit these people on a kind of interrupted basis, a couple of days here and a couple of days there. And over a period of time, you really got to know, because I was studying the work of quality managers, I got to know them well, and I got to know their organisations well. And again, what I was able to develop out of that was a typology of the different approaches on the basis of these 12 different managers. Would I be confident in saying that still applies? Possibly so. You know, there were those who were doing it because they've been told to. You know, right through the spectrum to those who were sort of really evangelical and passionate about what they did, and genuinely believed that they were going to change their organisation radically. But hey, that's another story which I'll come back to if time allows. So selecting the case is, I used to say I've used the sort of the plural, so think carefully about what's possible, what's necessary, and what's appropriate. Of course, the big challenge then is what are you going to collect and analyze in terms of data? And again, I'll come back to that because we deal with that later on. And then, of course, more particularly the interpretation of the data. This is important. So, like anything, you know, that this is just the sort of those words put into a sort of flow diagram. Of course, the reality is that when you start to do this, these not even arrows, but the connections, they can go all over the place, and sometimes you're going backwards and forwards, and it may not be as linear as perhaps the sort of the programs that you produce at the beginning of your research would ideally suggest is going to be the case. No pun intended. But again, as I've pointed out on a number of occasions, the ability to sort of to be agile and to sort of to take the opportunities, and indeed that is the sort of real value. Sometimes things happen, and of course nobody knew it was going to occur. You just happen to be in the right place at the right time, and that can provide a really sort of rich seam of data. And you can then explore that, providing, of course, that you can report all of this. Again, as I've alluded to, it is very important that A, you get access, and B, that the people that you want to speak to are willing to speak to you and go on the record, or at least to sort of be interviewed in such a way as to sort of their words can be recorded and then sort of written down. Having said that, again, in my case, what I didn't name the organisations. I just loosely described they were all in one sector, which of course was important. But it's not to say you have to stick to one sector, but it just seemed appropriate in my case. I anonymised the organisations, and I anonymised all the individuals. So yeah, anybody casually reading sort of my PhD thesis, they would have no idea who these organisations were. And then that might be sort of something you have to sort of do, because people often are hesitant to sort of say things which they sort of know will go on the record. But in most cases, most people in organisations are very happy to speak, albeit with the sort of the caveats that are sort of agreed in terms of the access agreement at the beginning. What are you looking for? Well, again, it's probably sort of very obvious in everything I've already said. Occurrence of instances germane to the issues being researched. And again, that comes back down to how well you bound sort of the issue, how much you define what it is that you're up to. Perhaps looking sort of at observable patterns, that things that sort of may occur, or may be particular to that organisation. So I like the sort of that bullet point number 4. That the thing that often people are a bit amazed when you speak to them is that, well, it's just what I do every day. It's a matter of course. Life is an everyday phenomenon, but as outsiders and researchers, that's what interests the research community. What do people do? How do they do it? How do they make sense of their working lives? And also, there's a very long tradition. Again, if anybody's not come across it, looking at the sort of the Hawthorne experiment. And there's a really good book by Helen Schwartzman, which describes the history of that. And of course, that started off as an experimental research to sort of as you may have seen if you've read any management research, of the sort of a causal connection between the efficiency of the workers and lighting levels. And too much detail, but of course it provided inconsistent sort of outputs. This is one of the issues. And what then happened is that sort of they had the sort of the common sense and gumption, if you will, to recognise that the idea of treating sort of the participants, or the sort of those who are sort of carrying out the work, as unthinking beings or entities. They're not machines, these are people. So what they then did is that so they went and talked to them, and what they discovered, lo and behold, is that people liked the fact that they were sort of part of this experimental or being sort of observed, and it gave them a sense of pride. So as such, there was a very serious questioning of the sort of the wisdom of using scientific approaches to study people, and better still to sort of what it gave rise to was the human relations aspect of management, which of course is to better understand what people do and how they do it. So it's again, coming back to sort of all of these, is that sort of people are very happy to provide their accounts, because quite often nobody bothers to ask them. They're just told what to do, how to do it, and nobody bothers to sort of to think, well, is there a better way? And indeed, what I became very attracted when I was carrying out my own research was the sort of the idea of Japanese work methods, because of course quality management or quality in the Far East had been done by the sort of the use of sort of the human relations movement of sort of really getting people involved in what they did and how they did it, because they're often better judges of what they the best and most effective way to do things, as opposed to sort of to senior managers doing it by diktat and procedure. Okay, so focusing on what's normal, abnormal, getting people to sort of providing their accounts, what they believe that is important. And of course, the other thing is, and I sort of talked about this a couple of moments ago, is using probing questions, getting people to really open up, which they will do if they're given, what I found, what they'll be perfectly happy to do if they're given an opportunity to do so. And then you can start to sort of to unpack what's going on and to sort of to get to the real crux of what the facts are. Like I put facts in inverted commas. That again, what I am pointing out here is that had I sort of merely sort of worked on the basis of the things that seem to be important in the pre-existing literature, I would not have sort of uncovered lots of things that I discovered in the process of carrying out my research. Okay, so to talk about what the sort of the different types of case study research are, the first of which is you study a group of individuals. So you might wish to sort of go and study a community and look at what they do and how they do it. And again, it might be a sort of a charity perhaps, or sort of I'm thinking about a voluntary organisation of such. One of the famous studies done by Daniel Wolf was the sort of study of the sort of the I'm not sure they were the Hell's Angels, but it was a sort of a motorcycle gang. Because of course, what brought these people together and what created the sort of the internal culture and workings and the milieu. Again, anybody who's ever tried to study organisations involved in the various activities will discover that they're often closed. We think we know them, but we don't until we get beneath the surface. So, okay, so it just depends what drives your particular interest in that. Descriptive case studies kind of does what it says on the tin, as they say. You're interested in providing descriptive theory of a particular organisation by doing the observations and interviews, and of course then compare it to sort of to pre-existing theories. So does what has been said in sort of the literature stack up when it's applied in the sort of particular instance in this organisation, or maybe a number of organisations, if that's what you believe you want to do. Explanatory case studies, these are we're kind of slipping back into the sort of the idea of causality, which is perhaps where I start off, the idea that quality management has been introduced, and lots of people saying it will produce organizational efficiency and cost savings and so on and so forth. So it may be a way, if you like, to start to try and to test the sort of the veracity of those theories in the particular instances. But again, with the sort of the health warning, if you will, that it may not produce what you think it's going to produce, that there may not be that straightforward linear causality, and other things may be occurring, and there may be things happening despite and not because of, so be aware of the sort of the limitations. Exploratory case studies, sometimes what you do is to sort of to use a case study, and in fact I think this is a good thing. In fact, people talk about sort of the triangulation, or sort of using sort of a multifaceted approach. What I often see is the sort of the idea of sending the questionnaires out and then doing the case study afterwards. I think that it's much better to do it the other way around, to sort of to use the case study to, as is being suggested in this explanation here, to provide the sort of the ability to find out what's going on and perhaps why, and then to use that as the sort of the launching pad for other other research projects that you may wish to sort of develop from that. Or it might simply be just to sort of to allow you to sort of focus in, which you can then sort of use by sort of greater boundedness. And also you may use a sort of another technique, such as using questions to sort of to test hypotheses, if that seemed to be appropriate. Again, that nothing is ruled in, nothing is ruled out, that it provides the sort of the researcher with loads of freedom. Incremental case studies, the last two of these 6 types, people want to sort of understand more. You know, so it might seem just a sort of a variation on what's already been said. And sometimes it may be sort of internally generated, so that they, and of course that they're often sort of very fruitful, where the sort of people within the organisation, they wish to better understand their practice, and they invite you to be part of, you know, studying them as a kind of a sounding board, you know, because you're an external set of eyes, as it were. Obviously, much more difficult if you're part of the organisation. So you've got to then play this dual role of being within and without at the same time. And then finally, and of course, you know, that kind of just I suppose alluded to that one, that where you have a personal interest in the case, because maybe you worked there, and you know, I've had a number of students who, you know, they wanted to study things within their own organisation, and there are obviously difficulties because, of course, what you think you see may be sort of different to what others may sort of see, but it can be a very great revelation to sort of to step back, because of course then you can sort of better see it from a sort of an objective perspective, which may be difficult. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the time. Okay, this is this comes from sort of Yin's book, but it's just using a number of sort of 2 case studies, and the idea of sort of doing everything we've talked about, and particularly as we're just about to sort of to do in the last few minutes of this presentation, is, you know, getting the data and then writing up, which of course is the most important thing. But you see over on the sort of the right hand side, cross-case conclusions, comparing one to another. That can be very effective. You know, why are there differences? Well, there may be a number of very good reasons, and that's for the sort of researcher to examine and explore. But most importantly, as is going on here, then the ability to sort of adapt and to challenge and perhaps present better theory, which of course will be very useful in terms of publication or in your thesis, which of course is in its own effect peer-reviewed publication. And of course, it can also have, as has been suggested here, particular policy implications, if that's what the sort of the objective is. Okay, epistemological approaches. Again, I won't agonize about this too much, but you see down at the bottom there, you've got sort of positivist, which of course is the idea of sort of, in effect, theory testing. But the criticism is, you know, as I say, that it's this superimposition or superimposing your particular views about what you think is important from what you have read. And there's a wonderful expression I came across when I was reading, avoiding the fallacy of the condescension syndrome, because you're the clever researcher and you know what's best. The reality is that when you go in and start talking to people, they know what goes on, they know better, or at least they have a very good view about what they think is important. So certainly do not disregard what they've got to say. Quite the contrary, make them the sort of the, you know, what they say. Give it primacy, because, you know, they're the people on the ground, they know what goes on. Interpretation, you know, that's a sort of the word, because of course, you know, every sort of word that we utter, we hope has got a particular meaning. I didn't mean to say that. Well, then, you know, say it better next time around. But we all do this. We say things, and, you know, judged by others, those words can have particular interpretations. You know, we're not machines. We're driven by emotions. But of course, as I've said, the key words here, the theory is on theory. So the focus is on theory building, making sense, and providing better, more faithful accounts of how these things play out in practice in the particular setting that you're looking at, and you know, with whatever issues that may sort of bring up. But of course, as we sort of know, as is being suggested here, difficult to explain unintended consequences and neglecting surrounding historical context. What's being said here is that, yeah, many things may be going on for many different reasons. And the one thing that you should always be aware of is that because people are not machines, thank goodness, and we don't run our organizations, and if they were machines, by and large, that they are subject to sort of the influence of people and the fact that they are notoriously inconsistent. You know, we all have our moods, our good days and bad days. But of course, what comes with that is the sort of the creativeness and innovative capabilities of human beings. So if you can get beyond looking at the sort of the problems, organizations can become very effective places for people to sort of work and develop new ideas and so on and so forth. Okay, firstly, as I'm working backwards, the critical, it may be that you're actually sort of trying to sort of to critique certain things that go on, but of course, with that comes the sort of the fact is that might be your, or maybe your hobby horse, and of course you may be sort of taking sort of a particular stance in terms of, sort of the power and control issues that some people comply with organizations. Again, when I was reading around this, there's some really fascinating studies of the sort of likes of prisons and how the idea of sort of, you know, prisons are sort of nothing if not sort of bound by rules, a bit like the military, very clear adherence to rules for very good reasons, which we understand. But also, once you sort of get beneath the surface of it, you find that sort of any sort of collective organization has to work on the basis of consensus. Once you get beyond consensus, you have big problems, because of course then it starts to fall apart, or people start to if not rebel, that they don't do things as willingly as they might otherwise do. Okay, at the heart of all this comes the sort of, what is the sort of thing that we're after? Well, it's data. And in any organization, there's a whole host of things that you can sort of look at. There'll be the sort of the background records, and certainly in the case of what I was looking at, the sort of procedures that people were guided by, and these were being newly written by people to sort of to produce consistent practice. So, you know, I was looking at the sort of the manuals that people adhered to, and how much relevance and reverence, more particularly, that they gave to these things. And quite often I found that they did things despite, not because of, and that became an issue. Direct observation. So again, if you're sort of in an organization, you see things go on and you describe what you're seeing. And of course, that's a very effective way of providing, you know, those accounts, as it were. Any further documents that may be in existence that you think are sort of relevant to what you're interested in. But most importantly, I think if you're going to do a case study, then if it doesn't involve interviews, whether they be structured or unstructured, using closed questions or open questions, whatever it may be, then I think it's your case study will be deficient. So use that as the sort of the basis of trying to sort of to get those people to provide their personal accounts, their personal views, because of course that's really, really important. Participant observation, you can do this as internally, externally, and again, I won't get too bogged down in that at the moment, so I will, because of course, it also really depends upon if you're involved in the organisation. Then of course that there are particular challenges to that, because the difficulty is, as I fully appreciate, if you go in as an external person, are people modifying their practice because of course that they believe that under scrutiny? My answer to that one is that it may be an issue to start off with, but I think most people, after a sort of fairly short period of time, they a bit like, you know, when you get a tape recorder out, they're always a bit reluctant to say things to start off with, but you know, after a while they forget about it and they forget about you. You just become part of the scenery. The important thing about doing this sort of work is not to become the event, as it were. And of course, anything else, that other artifacts that sort of may be relevant. Of course, this could be, you know, if it's about introducing new technology, what impact did that have on people? And there were lots of studies when computers were introduced into organizations back in, I suppose, probably sort of the early 80s, the impact that this had upon organizational working. And of course, you can guarantee there'll be lots of studies going on about home working and how that's been given a sort of a turbo boost because of the crisis that we've been through in the last couple of years. Okay, I probably don't need to say an awful lot more about this because, of course, it's all kind of intrinsic in everything I said. You can use quantitative approaches if you wish, questionnaires, because, of course, that's a very good way of providing consistent information, asking the same thing of lots of people, but, of course, as I say, with the sort of the caveat that all has to be codified. But I think it's much better then to sort of to back it up with qualitative techniques, sort of interviews, focus groups, observations, you know, which is the sort of the really in-depth, use that word again, thick descriptions of what's going on. And of course, what often people do try and do is to sort of triangulate, to sort of to put the two together. So you kind of from different angles. And of course, the whole thing about triangulation is to get to a point of unification. You know, that's where the truth lies. But don't be surprised if sort of the two different approaches produce two different things. And I'll urge you to go back and read the accounts of the Hawthorne experiment. And it was in the sort of the inconsistencies that better understanding of what goes on and why occurred. So be aware of that. Triangulation doesn't always provide that sort of unitary sort of view, or that sort of that immutable truth that people sometimes think that they're engaged in achieving. Okay, there are a number of pitfalls when carrying out case study research, and I think you will have these slides afterwards so you can sort of look at them. But what I would sort of say is that sort of selecting the wrong case studies, lacking in theoretical generalizations. Yeah, it depends what you're after. I mean, I don't think that trying to sort of come out with grand theory is ever a sort of a wise thing in terms of any sort of case studies. It's about the sort of specificity of the sort of the particular circumstances and making sense of that rather than sort of grand theory. But the other large volumes of data, anybody who's ever done interviews will sort of know that sort of an hour of an interview, it can easily take a whole day. And you know, I'm talking about sort of 8 to 10 hours of, you know, just doing nothing but sort of transcribing. So be aware of that. It'll generate more data than you'll ever know what to do with. The difficulty is that you start to sort of to sync up the sheer volume of it. So the more that you can focus in on the things that you think are important, after I suppose some sort of preliminary probing, the better. But of course that takes time. Defining band the case, again, that comes with the sort of territory of sort of knowing what you're up to and the most appropriate places to sort of do it. And again, flexibility and adaptability and change in the sort of the emphasis will sort of see you well. Yeah, one of the things that you're going to get is the sort of the lack of rigor, because of course, because of the sort of the thick descriptive data, there are those in the sort of research community who will never believe that this is somehow proper research. I'm just at sort of a loss to know how to sort of to counter that. If you count numbers, well, that's perfectly fine, but you know, what do those numbers mean? So it's kind of that's another debate, as it were. But obviously, the more you do this in a sort of rigorous and systematic way, and with care and sensitivity, the more you like to sort of protect yourself. There are obviously the ethical issues which I've talked about. So of course, it's all about consent and access and so on and so forth. And also, most particularly, even though you may dispense with sort of theory, you know, this is so-called grounded theories approaches. Eventually, you do have to sort of to reconcile it to sort of to something in the existing sort of literature. And even if the sort of the existing literature is pretty ropey and pretty poor, what you're doing by sort of carrying out such research is to provide something better and much more accurately reflecting what goes on and why. And of course, the difficulty with all of this is the sort of the making sense and interpretations. And again, I'm not going to sort of it's difficult to sort of to do justice to this, but of course this is where the sort of the real skill of the research is demonstrated. Well, you know, why did people tell you that? How did you make sense of what they were saying? And did you understand that people sort of, well, if they were saying different things, did it sort of were there particular reasons that? Did you explore it? So again, when you find the sort of the inconsistencies or the sort of the things that people are saying which are perhaps difficult, then of course that can provide a very rich seam of data. But of course, what you're always trying to sort of do is to sort of to look at what at the particular accounts given, and also recognizing that different people have different perspectives, and organizations, because they're made up of people and people are sort of always looking for what suits their particular purposes. You know, that there will always be organizational politics and people will sort of form alliances and groups. And certainly if you're looking at sort of organizational change, which dare I say quality management is part of, people use this as an opportunity to sort of to state their own territory out. but also some people were fearful of the changes and what it would mean for them. But again, trying to sort of look for these variations, organizing the data in such a way as it provides the sort of the best account that you can provide, given also, of course, the sort of big problem that you will have is you can't just put whole interviews in verbatim. You have to sort of to selectively sort of take out the bits that you think, as my supervisor to call them, the nuggets of information, which are most important, but also most particularly, what does what you say have relevance, or what is the relevance to the existing body of knowledge? And, and if, as in my case, that you found that it was deficient in some way, what are you going to offer in its place that makes or provides a better sense of meaning and explanation? Okay, right, we're coming to the end of this. In fact, it's taken slightly longer than I thought. So this is from another sort of references which I'll provide at the end. Case study findings can have implication for both theory development and theory testing. They may establish, strengthen, or weaken historical explanations of a case, and in certain circumstances lie theoretical as opposed to statistical generalization beyond the particular case studied. Yeah, and again, that's it. So a really good case can have lots of meaning, and it can incentivize and motivate people to sort of do their own particular case studies to look at whether the sort of things that were found in that first seminal publication or whatever it is that comes out of the work, for them to go and sort of do it to see if it plays out in the same way. Again, I'm not. You can read this later. There's a whole set of sort of this is some mistakes book of the case study report, and it's obviously very sort of logical, and it's a good sort of checklist to sort of to know that if you've achieved all of these, then you shouldn't be able to sort of to go far wrong. But I'll leave that to you because time is getting away with this. So in conclusion, case study is extremely sort of valuable and useful approach to conducting organizational research. But again, like all approaches, they should not be used without care, quite clearly. And they should be not used unthinkingly, and they do require a degree of sensitivity, and it won't suit everyone because, of course, you are very much on your own on this one, albeit that when you go into the organization, people will normally happily speak to you, but you have to sort of to dispense with perhaps the sort of the comfort of sort of sitting in your office and producing a questionnaire and go out and talk to people and be willing to sort of to be empathetic, to get them to sort of talk about their issues. As I've said in bullet point 2, best utilized in a situation where experimental research would be seen to be wholly inappropriate, where you're looking at sort of complex information with multiple perspectives from a group of people, which of course is the real sort of value of this, and of course allows organizations to be studied and to sort of look at the sort of the impact of whatever it is that you're interested in. Yeah, so, okay. And there's a sort of, I took out the sort of the main texts for case study research, but you see sort of Yin, obviously in alphabetical order. Yin is the sort of the big influence in this area, but there's a whole lot of other sort of books that you can sort of look at. And indeed, if you're involved in management research, you can't go far wrong if you sort of read the D.B. Smith et al. Book, which has been around for sort of many years, and I think is in its 5th or 6th edition. In fact, originally it was just used to be in Thorpe, but there's a number of other, or a couple of others now involved in it. But again, that will give you a really good view of what case study research is. Now it's bang on 2 o'clock, so I'm going to sort of take some questions, if that's okay. Jack, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'll go on.
Yep. There's none in chat. Maybe you put it out to open, and then I'll go to a posting that was in the webinar listing.
Okay.
Did anybody have any questions they wanted to pose?
Jack, may I suggest that perhaps we stop the recording, that people
yes, more than happy to, so I'll stop recording.
Thank you.